outdated right in front of the biggest pension fund manager we'd ever seen. I decided to show her what outdated really looked like. Madison Reed said it with that smirk she'd perfected since Daddy made her VP last year. The kid was 26, wearing a $600 sustainable fashion blazer and sneakers that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I'm Harold Morrison, 55 years old, and I've been the CFO of Reed Manufacturing for the past 12 years. Before that, I did my time in the Navy aboard the USS Nimitz and worked construction for 5 years building bridges across Michigan. But apparently none of that mattered to Golden Girl here. I didn't say anything back, just stood there in my Navy work shirt, letting the silence stretch until everyone in the room started shifting in their chairs. It was 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, and we were in the boardroom of Reed Manufacturing here in Detroit. The air smelled like burnt coffee and the kind of tension that shows up right before a $1.2 billion pension fund meeting. This wasn't just any investment. This was retirement money for 400,000 auto workers, guys like my dad who spent 32 years on the Ford assembly line before his knees gave out. I've been doing this for 25 years. I survived the auto industry collapse, the 2008 meltdown, and more plant closures than I care to remember. When the numbers don't add up and the workers start getting nervous, they call me. I'm the guy who keeps the lights on and the paychecks coming. But today, according to Madison, I was just the outdated guy in the corner who didn't understand transformation. Madison was pacing around in her designer jeans, checking her phone every 30 seconds, probably looking at her sustainability metrics or whatever influencer she was following this week. She had an MBA from Stanford that her father basically bought with donations, and she talked about disrupting everything like she'd invented the concept of change. What she'd never done was spend a winter morning at 5 a.m. watching a production line jam up because somebody cut the maintenance budget to fund a marketing campaign. "Did you hear me, Hal?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. "Catherine Wells is expecting innovation, not some boring presentation about production costs." "You look like my dad's foreman from the 80s. The 3 junior analysts in the corner suddenly became very interested in their laptops. They knew who I was. They knew I'd pulled this company through more crises than they could count. Timothy Wright had been here 3 years and seen me save us from a regulatory nightmare that would have shut down Plant 2. Oliver Hayes watched me negotiate us out of a supplier crisis that could have cost 200 jobs. But they also knew Madison was Maxwell Reed's daughter. And in family businesses, blood beats competence every single time. "My presentation is solid, Madison," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's something I learned in the Navy. Never let them see you sweat. Never raise your voice. Just stay steady. Catherine Wells isn't coming here for a dog and pony show. She's coming to decide if she wants to park $1.2 billion of union pension money in our manufacturing operations. She cares about production efficiency and job security, not your sustainable buzzwords." Madison rolled her eyes so hard it probably burned calories. "God, you're so literal. This is about energy, Hal. It's about transformation. Dad said I'm leading this pitch because we need fresh thinking. You're here for backup. You know, if we need someone to explain the boring technical stuff." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw what she was. A scared kid playing dress up in a boardroom she had no business being in. And I felt something snap inside me. Not loud, like a bolt breaking under stress, but quiet, like a cable finally giving way after holding too much tension for too long. I thought about my wife, Linda, working double shifts as a nurse so we could pay for our daughter's college tuition. I thought about the guys on the factory floor, 50 and 60-year-old men who couldn't afford to lose their jobs because some Stanford MBA wanted to play with their livelihoods. The door opened and Maxwell Reed walked in. Maxwell was 58 years old and had been coasting on other people's work for most of his career. He had the kind of tan that screamed, "I spend company time on golf courses." His idea of hands-on management was a quarterly walk through Plant 1, wearing a hard hat that had never seen a day of actual work. He clapped his hands together like he was about to announce a company picnic. "Gentlemen," he boomed, "ladies, big day today, big day. Madison, you look sharp. Very forward-thinking. Hal, you're here. Good, you bring the production reports. I brought the data, Maxwell," I said, patting the stack of folders in front of me. "The actual numbers, efficiency metrics, safety records, job impact assessments. Great, great." He waved me off, pouring himself coffee. "Just keep those under the table for now. We don't want to bore Catherine Wells to death before Madison works her magic. We're selling the future today, not the past." The past. He was talking about the 18 months I spent rebuilding our production efficiency after Maxwell, tried to automate everything with robots that kept breaking down. The past was the weekend I spent in Plant 3 during the ice storm, keeping the heat exchangers running so 47 families didn't lose a week's pay. The past was why this company wasn't currently being liquidated by creditors and why 800 people still had jobs. Maxwell, I said, keeping my voice steady. Catherine Wells runs the UAW Pension Trust. She represents 400,000 retired auto workers. These are people who worked their whole lives expecting their pension money to be safe. If we don't lead with operational fundamentals and job security, she's going to walk. Madison groaned. Dad, he's doing it again. He's being such a buzzkill. Can you tell him to just let me handle the presentation? Maxwell sighed, giving me that look that said, be a team player, Hal. Please. Madison has instincts for this new generation of fund managers. Just support her, okay? Be part of the team. Team player. The corporate version of shut up and take the hit. I looked at the clock, 8:55. Catherine Wells would walk through those doors in 5 minutes. I looked at Madison, adjusting her blazer like it was armor. I looked at Maxwell, completely oblivious to the fact that he was about to feed his company into a wood chipper. I thought about the machine operators who trusted me to keep their jobs secure, the welders who'd been here 15 years, the quality control inspectors who took pride in their work. Understood, I said, and I meant it. I understood perfectly. If they wanted a show, I'd let them have their show. I wouldn't interrupt. I wouldn't save them. I'd sit there in my boring work shirt and watch Madison crash and burn. Sometimes the best way to teach someone about consequences is to let them experience them. The double doors opened at exactly 9 parod. Catherine Wells didn't do fashionably late. She walked in, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Catherine Wells was maybe 5'4", wearing a practical suit that fit perfectly. And she had the kind of presence that made you straighten up without realizing it. I recognized the type immediately. She reminded me of Chief Petty Officer Martinez, who ran our engine room like a Swiss watch and could spot problems before they happened. Behind Wells came 2 associates carrying tablets and wearing expressions that said they'd seen companies die in rooms like this. These weren't MBA kids playing with spreadsheets. These were people who understood that behind every investment decision stood real families, depending on their pension checks. Miss Wells. Madison practically bounced out of her chair, extending her hand with all the enthusiasm of a golden retriever. I'm Madison. So excited to finally connect. Huge fan of your fund's sustainability matrix. Wells looked at her hand for a full second before shaking it. Quick, professional, done. No nonsense, no small talk. Ms. Ride, she said. Her voice was dry, efficient. Your father speaks highly of you. Dad's totally biased. Madison laughed, running her hand through her hair. But seriously, we are ready to revolutionize your thinking today. We're thinking outside traditional paradigms, transformation and all that. I took a sip of water to hide my reaction. Transformation? Sure, kid. I'd seen transformation. I'd seen what happened when Plant 4 in Flint closed down and 300 families lost everything. I'd seen what transformation looked like when it was done by people who'd never worked a day on a factory floor. Maxwell gestured for everyone to sit. Catherine Madison has prepared something really special. It captures our forward momentum perfectly. Wells sat down, opened a slim notebook, and uncapped a pen. I have 90 minutes, she said. My team reviewed your quarterly reports. I have specific questions about your production costs in the new green initiatives, the efficiency of your domestic operations, and your long-term job security projections. She looked around the room. Her eyes passed over Maxwell, dismissed the nervous analysts, and landed on me. It wasn't flirtation. It was recognition. She saw the practical posture, the quiet confidence, the guy who actually knew what happened when the machines broke down at 2 a.m. on a Saturday. Then Madison clapped her hands. Totally. We can get into the data later, but first let's talk about vision. She dimmed the lights and clicked her remote. The big screen lit up with a slide that just said transformation in some artistic font that probably cost more than a line worker's monthly salary. Manufacturing is a conversation, Madison began, pacing like she was giving a TED Talk. And right now our industry is shouting, but are we listening? We're pivoting to a worker-first, eco-conscious, digitally native story. I watched Wells. She hadn't written a single word. She was staring at the slide with an expression somewhere between boredom and mild irritation. Her younger associate was taking notes, but they looked more like a damage assessment than meeting minutes. I could see Wells doing the math in her head. calculating how much of her 90 minutes was being wasted on buzzwords. "We're launching a comprehensive sustainability campaign," Madison continued, clicking to show a collage of wind turbines and solar panels that looked suspiciously like stock photos. "We call it Project Future. We estimate a 300% improvement in environmental impact within Q3. Environmental impact isn't a financial metric," Wells said. She didn't raise her voice, just dropped the words like stones into still water. Madison froze. Her smile faltered for just a second. I'd seen that look before, on the face of every supervisor who tried to BS their way through a safety inspection. Environmental efficiency translates to cost savings, operational sustainability. It generates revenue streams eventually. Eventually, Wells repeated, making a note. She looked at Maxwell. "You're asking for $1.2 billion in pension fund investment, and your opening pitch is environmental metrics that might generate revenue eventually." This was where Maxwell should have stepped in. This was where any competent CEO would have taken control and brought the conversation back to solid ground. Instead, Maxwell chuckled nervously, his tan looking suddenly artificial under the fluorescent lights. "Catherine, it's about capturing market momentum. The sustainability market has incredible growth potential when you connect authentically." I wanted to laugh, but it wasn't funny. These people were playing games with other people's retirements. Wells represented teachers, firefighters, police officers, auto workers like my dad who'd counted on their pension being there when they needed it. And Madison was treating it like a college presentation where style mattered more than substance. Pension funds don't invest in potential. They invest in returns. Wells cut him off, her pen tapping once against her notebook. She turned back to Madison. "What's your actual cost per unit for this Project Future versus traditional manufacturing?" Madison opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She looked at the screen like the answer might magically appear next to the wind turbine's image. The silence stretched for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 seconds. I could see the exact moment Madison realized she didn't know the answer to the most basic question a manufacturing CFO would face. She cleared her throat, tugging at her blazer. "Well, the metrics are fluid because it's organic innovation, right? We're not looking at traditional cost models because we're disrupting the manufacturing paradigm itself. Fluid, organic innovation, disrupting paradigms." It was like listening to someone speak a foreign language, except the foreign language was corporate nonsense designed to hide the fact that she had no idea what she was talking about. The junior analysts had stopped pretending to take notes. They were just watching the train wreck now, and I could see the exact moment they realized their employment here might not be long-term. Timothy Wright was probably already updating his resume in his head. Oliver Hayes looked like he wanted to crawl under the conference table. "It's not fluid," I said. The room went dead silent. Madison whipped around to glare at me. Maxwell looked like he wanted to throw his coffee mug at my head, but Wells just turned her chair slightly to face me, and for the first time since she'd walked in, I saw genuine interest in her eyes. "It's not fluid," I repeated, keeping my voice flat and professional. "Cost per unit for sustainable production is currently running $127 per unit, which is 18% higher than our traditional manufacturing. But the efficiency improvements offset that within 6 months due to reduced waste and energy costs." Wells finally touched her pen to paper. She wrote something down, and I noticed her associate lean forward slightly, suddenly paying much closer attention. This was what they'd come for. Real numbers, actual data they could take back to their investment committee. Hal Madison hissed, her smile now looking more like someone trying to pass a kidney stone. "I was getting to those specifics. You don't need to interrupt the creative flow." There was no flow. There was only a drain, and we were circling it faster by the minute. "Go on," Wells said to me, ignoring Madison completely. "Why do the efficiency improvements offset the higher costs?" This was it, the moment that would define the next chapter of my career and possibly my life. I could save Madison. I could give some vague answer about market conditions or operational flexibility. That's what a team player would do. That's what the old me might have done, but then I remembered the outdated comment. I remembered Maxwell telling me to stay under the table like some kind of corporate furniture. I looked at Madison's designer sneakers and her sustainable blazer, and I thought about Linda working nights so we could afford Sarah's engineering degree. I thought about the workers counting on their pension checks. I made my choice. The efficiency improvements offset the costs, I said, locking eyes with Wells, because we're implementing proven manufacturing techniques that I learned on the factory floor 25 years ago. Lean production, waste reduction, preventive maintenance. Madison wants to call it transformation, But it's just good engineering that's been working since before she was born. Maxwell actually gasped. Harold, that is taken completely out of context. Wells didn't look at Maxwell, she just nodded at me. Continue. Madison looked like she'd been slapped with a wet fish. She stood there in the dim light of her transformation slide, realizing for the first time that this wasn't a game, and I wasn't just part of the scenery. I was the one who actually knew how to run this company, how to keep the machines running, how to keep people employed. Hal, Madison said, her voice getting higher. You're totally missing the big picture here. We're investing in future growth, not maintaining legacy systems. Legacy systems like quality control, I asked. Because that's what we're cutting to pay for your sustainability consultants. Wells made another note. Her associate was now typing furiously on her tablet. I could see them building their report in real time, documenting every word for the investment committee that would ultimately decide whether Reed Manufacturing was worth $1.2 billion of union money. Mr. Morrison Wells said, what other operational changes were made to fund this sustainability initiative? I could feel Maxwell's eyes burning into the side of my head, but I kept going. The dam had broken, and there was no stopping the flood now. We reduced our maintenance staff by 25%, delayed equipment upgrades by 8 months, and eliminated our apprenticeship program to meet the consulting budget allocation. We also cut overtime pay for quality inspectors and reduced safety training from 40 hours to 16 hours per year. Jesus Christ, Hal. Maxwell said, his voice barely controlled. You're making us sound like we're running a sweatshop operation. I'm disclosing material operational changes that directly impact production efficiency and worker safety, I said, which Miss Wells will discover anyway when she conducts proper due diligence. Wells looked up from her notes and management structure. I understand your audit committee chair has no manufacturing experience. Madison brightened, thinking this was safer territory. Poor kid had no idea she was stepping into quicksand. Aunt Diana, yeah, she's amazing. She teaches yoga and mindfulness, but she's super intuitive about operational flows. She really gets the holistic approach to fiscal responsibility. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the HVAC system humming in the walls. A yoga instructor, the head of the audit committee for a company seeking $1.2 billion in pension fund investment, was a yoga instructor who was intuitive about operational flows. I watched Wells's face, and I could see her mentally writing the report that would kill this deal. I slowly slid a document across the table. It made a soft sliding sound on the polished mahogany. It was the governance reform proposal I'd written 18 months ago. The one Maxwell had buried because it would have meant removing his relatives from the corporate payroll. Ms. Wells, I said quietly, if you look at Section 3 in the packet I just provided, you'll see our proposed risk mitigation strategy regarding board composition. The current structure is familial. We've outlined a transition plan to bring in 3 independent directors with relevant manufacturing experience within 90 days. Wells picked up the packet and flipped to Section 3. She read it while Madison stared at the document like it was radioactive waste. I could see her trying to process what was happening, how the meeting had shifted from her sustainability presentation to a complete dismantling of her father's management structure. I didn't approve that document, Madison said, her voice cracking slightly. Hal, why are you handing out unauthorized materials? This isn't part of the presentation. Because, I said, keeping my eyes on Wells, Miss. Wells asked about governance, and Aunt Diana teaches yoga isn't an answer that inspires confidence in fiduciary oversight of pension fund investments, representing 400,000 retired workers. Maxwell's face was turning an interesting shade of purple. His tan looked like cheap makeup under the fluorescent lights. Now hold on just a minute. Diana is very financially astute. She managed her own divorce settlement very successfully. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. A divorce settlement, that was his qualification for overseeing the audit committee of a manufacturing company. Then you're not compliant with standard institutional investment requirements, Wells said, closing the packet. She looked directly at Maxwell. You're asking me to leverage pension funds representing 400,000 retired auto workers. If I take this to my investment committee and tell them your audit chair's primary qualification is managing a divorce settlement, they'll recommend shorting your stock instead of investing in it. Madison looked at her father, then back at me, panic starting to creep into her voice. But our innovation culture, our transformation mindset, we have flexible work arrangements and a meditation room. You have a 2.3 million regulatory exposure, I said, opening my folder to the compliance section. I've outlined the potential OSHA violations on page 8. It exceeds your projected Q4 profit margin by 140%. Madison grabbed the packet from my hands and stared at page 8 like she was trying to read ancient hieroglyphics. These are all problems. Why would you show her this? You're actively sabotaging the presentation. I'm disclosing material risk, I said calmly. It's called compliance, Madison. If we don't disclose it and she invests, that's pension fund fraud. And fraud means federal prison, not minimum security country club prison. Real prison with orange jumpsuits that definitely don't come from sustainable fashion brands. Wells actually smiled, a quick, sharp expression that reminded me of a blade flashing in sunlight. He's right. He's saving you from a federal investigation, Ms. Reed. You should thank him. Madison's face went through several color changes before settling on a mottled red. The humiliation was complete. She was being educated in corporate law in her own conference room by the outdated factory guy she'd mocked an hour earlier. I need a break, Madison announced, her voice tight and high. I need to check on the catering arrangements. She walked out on her $400 sneakers, leaving behind the wreckage of her presentation and her credibility. I could hear her heels clicking down the hallway, each step echoing her retreat from a battlefield she was never equipped to fight on. Maxwell glared at me with undisguised hatred. You just destroyed our biggest opportunity. I prevented you from committing fraud, I replied evenly. Wells watched the door close behind Madison. Then she turned to me with the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. Keep talking, Mr. Morrison. Tell me about the production efficiency metrics. And for the next 45 minutes, with Madison sulking somewhere and Maxwell sitting in stunned silence, I did what I was actually paid to do. I ran the meeting. It felt like being back in the engine room of the Nimitz, where competence mattered more than rank, where the machines didn't care about your college degree or your daddy's connections. The production discussion went perfectly. Without Madison there to interrupt with transformational synergies, I walked Wells through our manufacturing capabilities, efficiency ratings, and worker safety records. It was like operating a well-calibrated machine. Fast, precise, no wasted motion. Wells's questions were surgical. She wanted specifics about our capacity utilization, our maintenance schedules, and our exposure to supply chain disruptions. I had answers for everything because I'd lived with these operations for 12 years. Every production report, every safety inspection, every efficiency improvement. It was all there in my head, organized and ready. Your equipment replacement cycle, Wells said, making a note. You're running some machinery past recommended service life. What's your capital expenditure strategy? I felt Maxwell tense beside me. This was the landmine he'd been hoping we wouldn't step on. We're negotiating an $8 million equipment loan with Detroit Commercial Bank, I said. Current terms are prime plus 175 basis points. Given our improved efficiency metrics over the past 18 months, we're hoping to reduce that to prime plus 125, and if Detroit Commercial declines, Maxwell finally spoke up. They won't decline. We've been with them for 15 years. Wells looked at him with the expression of someone who'd seen 15-year banking relationships die overnight. Mr. Reid, banking relationships are transactional, not sentimental. What's your backup plan? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Maxwell had no backup plan because he'd assumed loyalty meant something in modern banking. He was still living in the world where a handshake in a golf game could solve business problems. We have preliminary discussions with 2 other lenders, I said, which was technically true. I'd made some calls last month when I saw our debt ratios trending upward, but it would likely be at higher rates and require additional collateral. Wells made several more notes. When she finished, she closed her notebook and looked around the room. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. This has been educational. We'll be in touch within 48 hours regarding our investment decision. It was the professional version of don't call us, we'll call you. As Wells gathered her materials, she turned to me. Mr. Morrison, could I have a word privately? Maxwell started to object, but Wells' look silenced him. We stepped into the hallway while her associates waited by the elevator. Interesting company you work for, she said. It has potential, I replied diplomatically. Under different leadership, she added. It wasn't a question. That's not my call to make. Wells handed me her business card. It might be soon. That equipment loan, Detroit Commercial called my office yesterday. They're concerned about management competency and looking to sell the note. My stomach dropped. If Detroit Commercial sold our note to a collection agency, we'd be in default within 30 days. 800 jobs would disappear, including mine. However, Wells continued, pension funds like mine sometimes acquire distressed manufacturing debt at attractive prices, gives us more flexibility in how we structure ongoing relationships. She was offering to buy our debt, which would make her our primary creditor, which would give her significant control over company operations. Think about it, she said, stepping into the elevator. Sometimes the best investment isn't in a company's future. It's in its restructured present. The elevator doors closed, leaving me alone in the hallway with the business card and the weight of what she'd just implied. 3 days later, my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Maxwell Hal. We need to talk, my office, 7 a.m. When I arrived, Maxwell looked like he'd aged 5 years since Tuesday. His tan looked shallow under the fluorescent lights, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. Detroit Commercial declined renewal. He said without preamble. They want the full $8 million in 2 weeks. I sat down across from him. What did you tell them? That we have other options? But Hal, we don't. I've called every relationship I have. Nobody wants to touch us after that meeting leaked. Leaked? Maxwell's jaw tightened. Wells people have been making calls. Due diligence, they call it. Words getting around about our governance issues, the regulatory exposure, Madison's presentation performance. I kept my expression neutral, but internally I was impressed. Wells worked fast. There is one option, Maxwell said, sliding a document across his desk. Wells Fund offered to acquire the Detroit Commercial note at face value. No discount, but there are conditions. I picked up the document. It was a restructuring proposal. Catherine Wells's fund would acquire our debt, convert part of it to equity, and require immediate governance reforms, including the appointment of an interim COO to oversee daily operations while management transitioned to advisory roles. The interim COO position had my name on it. She wants you, Hal. She wants you running the day-to-day operations, while Madison and I step back. I looked up from the document. What did you tell her? Maxwell's shoulders sagged. I told her yes. We don't have a choice. 6 months later, I was sitting in Maxwell's old office, which was now my office. The nameplate on the door read Harold Morrison, Chief Operating Officer. Madison had taken a position with a sustainability consulting firm in Austin, where her enthusiasm for transformation was apparently better appreciated. Maxwell played golf 3 days a week and attended board meetings where he sat quietly and voted as directed. The governance reforms had gone through smoothly. And Diana was replaced by 3 actual manufacturing professionals with relevant experience. The sustainability consulting budget was redirected to equipment maintenance and worker training. Production efficiency had improved by 35% in 4 months, and we'd restored the apprenticeship program that was creating the next generation of skilled workers. Catherine Wells Fund had ultimately invested $800 million, not the original $1.2 billion, but it was structured as a partnership rather than just an investment. She had a board seat and quarterly operational reviews, but she let me run the company without interference. More importantly, all 800 jobs were secure, and we'd added 50 new positions in quality control and maintenance. I kept Maxwell's old stress ball on my desk. Sometimes I squeeze it when I'm thinking about decisions and consequences. Each action sets the next one in motion, creating a chain reaction that continues until the energy dissipates. Madison was wrong about one thing. I wasn't outdated. I was just experienced. And in the end, competence isn't about age or buzzwords. It's about knowing the difference between substance and noise, between vision and delusion, between building something lasting and just making it look good for the cameras. The best revenge, it turns out, isn't dramatic. It's simply being right when it matters most. It's protecting the people who count on you and making sure that when the smoke clears, the right person is holding the wrench. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates, the gray-haired guy in the corner who's been watching, learning, and waiting for his moment to show what real competence looks like. In a world obsessed with disruption and innovation, the greatest power often belongs to those who understand that some things don't need to be revolutionized. They just need to be done right.